What is going on YouTube? June here, and I'm back again with another Idols Heroes video. Today we're going to be taking a look at Vortex Cheese. I think we have one more week left till they remove it from the game. I'm super sad. I actually think it's one of the best contents that's ever been in the game. Again, I'm a PvE junkie. I don't play too much PvP, so I can't speak too much about that, but I really do think there's so much depth and nuance and strategy, tinkering you can do, things you can learn about game mechanics. It's just such a nice game mode, and unfortunately a lot of people will only ever do it once, if at all, and then they just complete it and they never have to do it again. That's something I see often on Discord. A lot of people saying like, what's the point of pushing Defier, or what's the point of pushing Vortex? It's like the reward is you don't have to ever do it again, right? That's not the way I see it, but that's because I have a very unique experience as a streamer slash content creator, because I get to do this many times over, and I get to learn a lot, and I get to have different looks at the content, and I get to appreciate it for, again, it's nuance. It's a lot of depth, a lot of strategy, a lot of little adjustments you can make, and I think that's hella cool, hella fun. But unfortunately it's gone. It is what it is. But what I want to try to do in this video is kind of just build upon what Jesus Here's guide has done. Again, if you haven't read that guide, you certainly should many times over. Make sure you thoroughly understand the basics and all the fundamentals that are outlined in that guide. I will leave the link to that guide in the description box below, so please do check that out. What I want to provide is like a framework. So if you've never done this before and this is your first time and you have a week to do it, that's a lot of stress, right? So any amount of anxiety, stress that I can alleviate, I think would help people that are going to be pushing over the next week. And I think it's the framework that I want to approach in this video, and that is a way to look at every single battle. You're going to be doing 30 battles to get from Valiant 6 to Defier 6, and another 30 more planets, 30 battles to get from Defier 6 to Defier 1. Regardless of where you are on that spectrum, you're going to be doing a bunch of battles. And I think if you break down every single battle into 3 phases or 3 stages, such as early game, mid game, and end game. So if you break down every battle into those stages, super relatable because we talk about that all the time in Idol Heroes, so hopefully you can relate. Early game is going to include Aleria doing her basic and Tix landing his ghost on the Bellrain. For the most part, sometimes there's an Amin Ra, but let's just say early game is Aleria doing a basic and a Tix landing a ghost. Mid game is going to include Delaciums. It's going to be a lot of replicates happening, hopefully, and that's going to sustain you through the mid game into the end game. And end game is going to include studying the battle report, taking a look at it, analyzing it, figure out what's going on, confirming some things, and then just using the skip function pretty much effectively so you save yourself time. And the other part of endgame is going to be dealing with carry RNG. There isn't much you can do there, but that's essentially what endgame is, right? She is the end boss. Every single wave essentially comes down to you killing carries and getting the victory. So let's break down the 3 phases a little bit more in detail. All right, so what do I mean by early game? In early game, like I mentioned, you're going to be using an Aleria to land a basic on slot 1, and then you're going to want your Tix to do an active, which means your Tix needs an energy artifact, and hopefully die to a Bellrain, because any other hero or enemy that takes on that Tix ghost is usually not going to translate to a victory. Now there is like a 1% chance, I think, where you can actually still clear planets where your ghost doesn't land on the Bellrain. I've had that happen maybe 8 or 9 times total, so it is possible, but let's just say 99.9% of the time you need to get the ghost on the Bellrain, otherwise you don't have a chance of clearing the planet. I gotta make an edit here. So I just want to mention something that's pretty important that I kind of didn't really mention during this video, and that Bellrain is not on every wave you clear, so just keep that in mind. I do mention Tix and Bellrain pretty often during this video, saying that you do need to land the Tix has to like the Bellrain, you got to kill the Bellrain, all that nonsense. But that is important when you're facing a Bellrain, and so I'm just assuming that you know when to use a Tix and when not to use a Tix, but just keep in mind you're not always using a Tix. Bellrains are pretty abundant and a huge component of pushing Vortex, but there are going to be planets that don't have Bellrain. In those situations, you can kind of omit the early game, use a Tix to kill the Bellrain, because clearly there won't be a Bellrain. Anyways, back to the video. Slot 1, like in this case right here, as you see, Sherlock, no problem here, right? Sherlock is not going to dodge, there's no issues. The issue arises when you have a carry in slot 1, and pretty much you just have to sit through that RNG and just wait for one, your Aleria not to get dodged, and two, your Delaciums to actually replicate the proper debuff. Aleria has an attack steal, which is good, which is the whole reason why this is even possible. But the second part of it is Delaciums can actually replicate any debuff, and the other debuff you often use is when there's a Bellrain. The Bellrain gets debuffed by Tix's active, which has also a debuff, so you can sometimes replicate the wrong thing. It's pretty much just a waiting game where you just wait through the RNG of the replicates happening properly. Right? Bellrain is the other part of the early game problem you have to solve, and it's just all about sequencing. It's understanding that Bellrain, when she does a basic, will hit slot 1. So you just need to put Tix in slot 1 in the majority of cases. Sometimes there's going to be a hero that attacks before Bellrain that will hit slot 1 consistently, and in those cases you clearly don't want to have your Tix in slot 1 because that just removes all opportunity for your Tix to get killed by the Bellrain. So you just need to pay attention to the attack order of Bellrain, and most times she's going to be attacking 5th if not 6th. So the carries will go first, the Russells will go first, Sherlocks will go first, and clearly Adas will go first. But a lot of those heroes are very predictable in the sense that if you can avoid getting hit, you're fine, because carries are random, Sherlocks are random, and Russells are also random, and Adas are going to target highest HP. So it's just about waiting for the right RNG to line up in early game where your Aleria is able to hit, your Tix is able to do an active, then die to the Bellrain basic, and then you can transition into the mid game. All right, so let's talk about the mid game here. Mid game, there's not too much going on, but it pretty much boils down to your replicates. Your Della's replicating is how you transition like from that early game stage all the way into the end game, right? The Della's need to replicate, need to reduce all the attacks, they start doing no damage, and then either your Della's or your Inosuke's take over and they pretty much clear the way for you, right? That's the end game stuff. But in the mid game, it's all about Della's replicating. So things to keep in mind are what would prevent Della from replicating. It's going to be Sherlock doves, that CC, that hard CC, as well as Tara seals, whether that's coming from Tara himself or the radiation that happens in Valiant 1 / Defier 1. Those two sections of your push are going to have radiation, and that's severely going to mess with your ability to replicate. So keep those two things in mind. CC is always going to affect Della's ability to replicate. The other CCs, you don't got to worry about. Whether he's frozen or stunned or silenced or whatever it may be, he's still able to replicate through that. So there's no worries there. It's just Sherlock's and Tara seals, whether again the planet radiation or Tar himself. But that's pretty much it for mid game. You're just transitioning from early to mid, and the only way you can do that is to get the Dellas to replicate Aleria's debuffs. So it's kind of just building on the early game stuff. All right, so let's jump into the end game stuff, right? This is where two things are really important. One, understanding that the gatekeepers are going to be carries. They're going to be the ones that are going to, destroy your runs. They're the reason you're losing. And if you can kill them, they are the reason why you got the victory, right? So carries are the bosses that you have to defeat in the end game, the end bosses as it were. And the other thing you have to understand is the battle report. Battle report, and just taking a look at it, even just briefly to make sure and confirm something, is super important. So you have to understand that skipping and looking at the battle report is super efficient when you're making these pushes, and time being a factor and only 1 week left of doing cheese, it's pretty important to understand how to analyze the battle report. So the battle report is important to take a look at if you're getting end game damage. And what I mean by end game damage is like 10 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion, maybe even a trillion damage coming from your Inosuke and your Delaciums. Either or, right? Whoever you're using to clear the wave. If you don't see that damage after 10, maybe even 20 attempts, if I didn't see any damage, I'd probably stop before that, but 20 attempts and not seeing any end game damage is pretty alarming. So that just means you need to check and make sure everything in early game is happening the way it should, and everything in mid game is happening as it should. And there's usually something missing, and that's what's causing your Dellas or your Inosuke to not be able to do damage in the end game. Now, because carries are the gatekeepers in endgame, there is one tactic you can use, and that is using a second Tix. Now, the first Tix, as I mentioned in the early game, is going to be used with energy, right? So you're using energy, put the ghost on the Bellrain, get her out of there. The second Tix you're going to be using is actually going to be a quote-unquote slow burn Tix. I think Jesus refers to it as the AQ bomb in his guide. So it's a second Tix that you use that just as a basic, and you pretty much want it to die in round 1. right? It can be like a 10-star ticks, it can be an E5, V4 ticks, it doesn't really matter, as long as the ticks just does a basic and dies. And that's because you are leveraging the fact that after round 15, all damage keeps scaling, and that ticks ghost that sits there on that enemy is going to keep building up damage inside, and eventually when you get to around 60 or 80 and your Delacium / Inosuke kills that unit, it's going to explode and probably do like 1,000,000,000 damage and kill everything instantly, right? So you don't need to deal with these carries like coming back and maybe not dying. Like, as long as you kill, again, there's RNG there, as long as you kill the hero that has the ghost, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to get the clear. The issue is you only really have so many spaces on your team, so you're often giving up a little bit of equity in the early / mid game, because maybe you're shaving off a Delacium, maybe you're dropping an Ignis for that ticks, which means your Inosuke might not be protected from CC, which means he can't build his shield. Again, you guys see where I'm going with this? You're gonna have a harder time transitioning from early to mid to late because you're taking away the support that your damage dealers need, but you're picking up a lot of damage in the end game if you can make it there. So that is a tactic you can use in end game to kind of like I don't know if it's mitigating, but it's a way you can get results and still get the victories. And I think relying on the AQ bomb or the slow burn ticks, the other ticks that's not using energy, I think relying on that ticks is really good. I've gotten really good results doing it. Of course, you just have to understand that some of the RNG early game is going to be sacrificed. It just gives you inevitability, right? Like end game ticks exploding, doing too much damage. So that is pretty much the end game, and that pretty much sums up the framework that I think can help a lot of people understand the Vortex and the battles, because they don't change. Yeah, you're always fighting, there's always an early, mid, and late game, and regardless of what you're going to be facing, you're most likely going to be using a combination of Tixes, Inosuke's, and Della's. And once you understand that framework, you'll be able to hopefully go in with a bit more confidence, and when you skip, you know why you're skipping. And when you skip and you look at the damage report, you know, okay, maybe this wasn't the run, I'll skip a couple more times. Okay, there's that 10 billion I was waiting for because everything else has, you know, been set up properly. Now it's just about RNG, and then you can keep skipping confidently knowing that you're just waiting for the luck to line up where the Tix Ghost dies or your Delacium / Inosuke's are able to kill the carries properly. Right, so hopefully all this information helped out. I wish you all the luck if you are pushing in the next week. I would highly suggest, again, you take a look at Jesus' guide. I also suggest that you join the official IH Discord, because there is a great channel in there where there's people constantly helping. If you have a particular planet you're struggling with during your run, you can just post a screenshot, let people know what you're working with, what's been the struggle, or there's a question, why is this not happening? And they'll be able to answer it live for you. So I highly suggest, if you're making the push, have all the resources, again, the gold and the dust and the gems, but make sure you read the guide and join the Discord so that way if you do get stuck, you'll be able to get someone to help you out. I will be streaming most of these pushes, I believe. I mean, time is the issue. There really isn't much time to mess up. I have to push my personal account and maybe a couple more people that have reached out. So if you want to check that stuff out or get some help on the spot, check out my Twitch stream. I'm there every single day, 10 a.m. to around 2 p.m. But with these Vortex pushes, it usually ends up being a long day anyways. So I should be there in the next week or so doing those pushes when Vortex is open. So hopefully you found it useful, and good luck, and rest in peace, Cheese Method. I'm really going to miss it. See you guys in the next video. Peace.